following program is a production of the Barroom Network. It is intended for all audiences.
Doug Buffone.
This defense sucks. This is moronic.
John Buffone.
If your best run plays are coming off end arounds, there's a problem.
Doug was behind the microphone first. He never held back.
Very difficult to score when your offense is on the bench. When your defense is out there giving up 70, 80, 70, 64-yard drives.
Now, it's his nephew, John, and there's no holding this Buffone back either.
The biggest thing that affected Justin Fields was a coaching change, and now he has an offensive coordinator, and he actually will fit a scheme to the quarterback, something we have not seen in a long time.
I've had it. I have had it. I want somebody to get kicked in the ass.
When I see Twitter polls and national media and fans weighing in on who is going to have the number one overall pick in the 2023 draft, and I see people commenting Chicago and it's not even close, then yeah, you know what? I'm going to get a little defensive.
I got my ass whipped many times, but I tell you, I took somebody down with me.
I don't think the Bears are a 2 to 3 win team. So to answer your question, no. The Bears aren't going to be the worst team in the NFL.
It's Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show.
Might have to tweak that intro at some point. But anyway, hello and welcome to Buffone 55, a fast-paced approach at breaking down those Chicago Bears. I'm John Buffone, and with me, as always, is my co-host and trusty producer, Alyssa Barbieri. Alyssa, we're back from a little vacation here, but the Bears didn't get any better. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, it really feels like nothing has changed except for, maybe Fields' shoulder injury and then coming back. But outside of that, Bears keep losing and, that intro just keeps aging like milk.
Yeah. Oh, man. I thought, did you hear the confidence in my voice when I was talking about that? Now I'm just like, all right, come on, guys. I got to get at least one more so I don't look like a complete jackass. But that's neither.
But at least they're not the worst team. The Texans still have that. So you're not wrong, John. Let's put that out there. You're not wrong.
You know what? This is going to be the year of technicalities. They're not the worst. So technically, I'm still kind of right. But at any rate, Alyssa, let's get to the topic at hand. The Bears have a pretty tall task this week when they host the NFC's best, the Philadelphia Eagles. That should get you into the holiday spirit. And we got a great guest joining us tonight to help us better understand how this team became the cream of the crop in the NFC. But just in case this is your first time listening or watching Buffone 55, Alyssa, tell them how this show works.
Absolutely. So Buffone 55 has 3 segments, and we usually begin with our guest. And this week, we've got a great one. But we're going to shake things up tonight and start with our B55 segment because we missed a lot and we have a lot to talk about. So our B55 segment is when I ask John 5 questions and his responses must be completed within 55 seconds. The 55 is John's way of paying tribute to the great Doug Buffone, his uncle, his mentor, and a man who played 15 seasons with the Bears and wore number 55. Next, we're headed for a free-for-all that we call Buffone's Basement, where Aldo Gandia joins John and me, and the 3 of us try our best to stay positive amid a 6-game losing streak that could very well turn into a 10-game losing streak to close out the year. We're then going to wrap things up with Sean Green, the host of the Die Hard Eagles podcast and the Sports Gambling podcast, who's going to help us get to know the Eagles a little bit better. But before that, let's kick things off with our B55 segment. So, John, you've been off for a while. You remember how to do this?
Yeah, you know what? You get rusty because there is a certain cadence to this thing. So I might be stumbling out of the gates here, but we'll give it a shot.
Okay, John, here we go. So the Bears were off last Sunday. For a lot of Bears fans, this is a chance to do something on Sunday other than yell at the television while some are just glued to football. So I have to ask, how did you spend your Bears bye week? 55 seconds are on the clock.
Well, I know a lot of people use the bye week to take a Sunday off from football, and I understand that. And that's probably what I should have done. My fantasy football team, I think, sewed up 11th place on Sunday, so there's no real reason for me to keep flipping back and forth between games. But there is something to watching good football games with no rooting interest. I enjoyed watching Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I enjoyed watching Minnesota and Detroit and the Jets and the Bills. Look, there was no stress or anger or second guessing. There's something to be said for enjoying sports as a sports fan rather than a Bears fan. And I know we don't get many opportunities for that except for the bye week and unfortunately the playoffs and the Super Bowl in the offseason. But listen, because we're always glued to the Bears game, we sometimes miss really good games that are going on at the same time. So I had the flexibility to watch the slate of games that I wanted to watch on Sunday. Do I wish the Bears were playing? Sure, but the bye week has its perks.
Yeah, I had a very relaxing bye week. Didn't have to stress, didn't have to work. I had all my posts pre-done. So I went bowling in the morning. I bowled over 100 in all 3 of my games. So I'm very proud of that.
There you go.
And then I came back just like you and got to enjoy some good football, especially the 1 o'clock games. Because a lot of the 4 o'clock ones were, got a blowouts. Weren't even close. But it was nice to just kind of sit back and enjoy it. But then at the same time, obviously, it just feels a little different when you have a vested interest in, who's playing. So, but it was, I did enjoy for once that the Bears didn't lose because they had just lost for 6 straight weeks. We have 4 weeks coming up where they're probably going to lose. I don't know if there's another win on the schedule, but it felt nice to kind of come out of a week and not have to deal with the Bears losing. Yeah,
it was, it was as stress-free as a football Sunday can probably get.
Yeah, until the playoffs, like you said, where, the Bears have no...
right.
They aren't there. Okay, so heading into this Sunday's game, there's no doubt that the Bears are outmatched on paper against the Eagles. One fan base has Super Bowl aspirations, while the others had been looking at mock drafts since October. So while this might not be a pretty watch, what will you be looking for on Sunday afternoon? You've got 55 seconds.
Okay, so even though I've been off for 3 weeks, I'm going to somehow sound like a broken record here. It's all about Justin Fields and the progression of the offense. The whole season has been about him. Let's see if he can step up and put his stamp on a game where his team is a heavy underdog to a Super Bowl contender. I also want to see Chase Claypool get a little more involved now. He had the whole bye week to get accustomed to the playbook and the terminology, and there seems to be instances where it appears that Claypool just wasn't on the same page with the rest of the offense, but there have been some nice catches downfield as well. So let's see if he can take a step forward at some point. And finally, I think health is a big factor. If you're a non-competitive team that isn't going to the playoffs, the last thing you want is something that could potentially hinder next season. We saw Von Miller get hurt in Buffalo. We saw Debo get hurt last Sunday. We saw Kyler Murray tear his ACL. So staying healthy is just as big for a bad team going into the offseason because you don't want it to screw up 2023.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's why, a lot of fans, and I know I talked about it too, is, that was one of the reasons why we didn't want Justin to rush Justin Fields back after that shoulder injury, because we know there's nothing left to play for this season except for him continuing to develop. So health is a big thing. And like you said, heading into this game, I feel like from here on out, the last 4 games of the year, it's all about Justin Fields, right? So obviously, kind of looking at what he was able to do when after that mini bye week and really stepping up, those performances happen against really good defenses. And starting on Sunday against the Eagles, I don't think there's a better defense in the league right now. So I'm really curious to see how Fields steps up against this Eagles defense. And I'm also curious to see how some other players are going to. Obviously, Jack Sanborn is someone who, outside of Justin Fields, has been, garnering a lot of attention. And he looks like he's making a claim for a starting job in 2023. And, I'd like to see a little bit more Alex Leatherwood, obviously at right tackle. For the 10 snaps he was in against the Packers, he looked pretty good, right? So I'd like to see more of him, some N'Keal Harry, some of these guys who aren't necessarily, they're not either going to be under contract next year or they don't really have a starting job. I want to see what they have to prove, right? Because there's nothing left to play for at this point. You got a whole bunch of injuries. Let some of these guys play and let's see what they got.
Yeah, as fans, when you're at this point, whenever you've been out of playoff contention for quite some time, you have to find other things to look for in the game because obviously you're not striving. We're not even in the hunt. So it's you have to be able to look at things that you can take away and build on because you're surely not vying for a playoff spot. So as fans, we have to keep an eye out for other things other than, the scoreboard at the end.
Because let's be real. I mean, as soon as I saw the Eagles put 40 on the Giants, I'm like, oh no,
we're in trouble.
This could get out of hand pretty quickly. So it's going to be in trouble. So let's see what Fields can do.
Sure.
So John, there's no doubt that most of the things the Bears have been doing have been in anticipation for 2023. That could also mean some of the players are trying to play themselves onto the 2023 roster. So who is one player that could make the most of this 4-game stretch? The clock starts when you do.
There probably are a few to choose from here. There are probably 2 or 3 receivers probably hoping to get another contract. But how about Chicago's sweetheart? You brought him up, Jack Sanborn. I think he has played himself onto the roster next year, but is he fighting to be a starter in 2023? In 3 of the last 4 games, Sanborn has double-digit tackles, and in the one game he didn't have double-digit tackles, he had 9. And in that 4-game stretch, he also has 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. Look, Sanborn is not an athletic freak. He isn't a speed guy. He's 6'2", 234 pounds, and he's an undrafted rookie out of Wisconsin. But he's a smart player that can beat runners to the spot, and he seems to recognize plays very quickly. I don't know if he's the next great Chicago Bears inside linebacker, but it's pretty obvious that he can play in this league. And if he keeps racking up tackles and keeps shining in these last 4 games of the season, maybe he makes a case to the coaches and the front office that maybe they don't have to invest as many resources in the offseason at the linebacker position.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Sanborn's been really fun watching him. It's kind of like, you don't want to say that, obviously Roquan Smith being traded was ever a good thing, but if there's a positive to come out of it, it's that we've gotten to see Sanborn step into a starting role, and he looks like he belongs, and he's just been getting I mean, it's hard to believe he's only started 5 games at this point. It feels like he's been in there a lot longer, just because Matt Eberflus used the word consistent to describe him, and I think that we've seen that, and he's getting better with each passing week. And I feel like I jumped the gun with like my response to the last question.
Yeah,
where I was like,
nailed it.
Yeah, N'Keal Harry is someone I think I would like to see play for a spot on the roster next year, because we haven't really gotten to see a lot of him. First off, the Bears passing offense has been non-existent until probably a couple weeks ago against the Packers, and now Darnell Mooney's out, and Chase Claypool, he has a knee injury, he didn't practice on Wednesday. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see, that he had that one really great catch against the Packers. I want to see a little bit more of him, right? And again, This is the time to see what they have. And I know, like, Byron Pringle, I mean, you're paying him $4 million this year. I mean, I really thought we'd see a little bit more. So I don't know, kid, show me what you got right at this point. So,
no,
I mean, there's a lot of players that have a chance to earn a roster spot, because let's be real, there's going to be a lot of roster turnover in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have that many guys under contract going in the next season. So let's call it what it is. We can talk about trying to build a culture and a mentality, but if 50% of the guys aren't even going to be on the team next year, what are you building? They're not going to be in Chicago. So what are we talking about? So I agree that there's probably some guys. I think N'Keal Harry is a great one to see what you actually got in him, and what he could bring to the team next year. But there's a lot of things that have to happen in the offseason. So I guess we'll see.
We'll see. We have, it's a very important and big offseason that we've been talking about for a while here on Buffone 55, and we're going to talk a lot more about it coming up in these last 4 weeks.
Get used to it.
Get used to it. So, we're going to look at the other end of that with just 4 games left. Who are some players that could find themselves without an invitation to come back in 2023? You know the drill, 55 seconds.
Okay, so once again, there's plenty of candidates for this. So I actually have 2 names. First, I'm going to go with Lucas Patrick. This is a guy they signed to be a stabilizing force on the offensive line. They signed him to a 2-year, $8 million deal, but I think his dead cap is only about $1.5 million next year. But he's been hurt, and he hasn't been able to play center, and his play at guard has been suspect. If they invest in the line in free agency or the draft, I can see them letting him go. Now, I know he's on an IR, so he really can't play himself back onto the roster, but the play of others could make that decision for him. Another guy I think would be Justin Jones. I think a lot of players on defense should be worried that they're not going to be back next year. He signed a 2-year, $12 million deal and has a $7.4 million cap hit next year, but his dead cap would only be like $2.5 million. So clearly, they need to revamp the defense, and letting go of Jones could be a move they make to clear some space for someone else. So I'll go Patrick and Jones.
Yeah, Lucas Patrick, that's a really good one because you kind of have to think about exactly how Ryan Poles is going to address the offensive line situation in the offseason. Like, obviously, I feel like Tevin Jenkins at right guard. And, I think that the Bears are really high on Braxton Jones at left tackle, and you have Cody Whitehair there at left guard unless they decide to part ways. So, center, Lucas Patrick, he's there for another year. But again, we saw 10 snaps of him at center this year, and it was in one game before he went down. And, we can see what Poles does in the draft or in free agency, what he ultimately decides to do. It's going to be really interesting to see exactly how they handle that. And another one on defense is Al-Qadim Muhammad, because the Bears pass rush has just been non-existent. They have the fewest sacks in the league. I think it's 15 or 16 or through 13 games. Mm-hmm. And ever since they traded Robert Quinn, it's just been bad. And again, Muhammad is someone who's going to have a big cap hit next year. It's going to go up, and you kind of expect more from him. So he's someone I could see being one of those cap casualties heading into the offseason. So it'll be, especially if the Bears are lucky enough to go out and get Will Anderson in the draft, right? We'll see. So I'm really curious to see how some of these guys, you mentioned Justin Jones, maybe they get, Jalen Carter in the draft. So, it'll be very interesting to see, because Poles, he's got a lot of money. He's got a lot of draft picks. And he's got a lot of big decisions to make.
He's got a lot of work to do too. And I think it was Chubbs that said it in the chat room that the entire defensive line needs to be replaced. I kind of agree with that because this is a defense that relies big time on getting pressure with the front four. Like, they just don't blitz that much. That's what it comes down to. And if you don't get pressure with the front four, you're leaving your secondary out to dry to try to cover people for 5, 6, 7 seconds. And that's just not going to work. So you need to have some pressure with the front four. And this ain't the front four to do it. I think that we've seen enough to know that much.
Absolutely. You feel for the secondary, because they were doing pretty well early on. Obviously Kyler Gordon had to kind of find his footing there, find his sea legs, but with Eddie Jackson had a really good bounce back year. Jaquan Brisker's been amazing. With this passing defense, they just need a little help, right? When you have a quarterback that can do whatever the hell he wants to back there, that's just unfair. So go and fix the pass rush, Ryan Poles. You need to.
Yeah, against the Packers, I saw Aaron Rodgers getting 5, 6 seconds. I'm like, are you kidding me? Any quarterback, let alone Aaron Rodgers, is going to find somebody open if they can just stand back there, have a cup of coffee, eat a sandwich, and then decide it's time to throw the football. Like, you got to get some pressure somehow.
Man, I wish Justin Fields had that much time to throw. Just every time I watch that, I'm like, man, imagine if Fields had that much time back there.
We have the time where we don't want the time, and we don't have the time where we need the time. That's just that's what it comes down to.
Okay, John. So before your vacation, you thought the Bears could have 3 more wins left on the schedule. But after losses to Atlanta, the Jets, and the Packers, that doesn't seem likely. With just 4 games remaining, how many wins, if there are any, how many wins do you realistically think are left on the schedule for the Bears? No clock on this one. Take your time. I can't wait.
Well, it turns out I'm wrong about a lot of things. I thought they could have won a few of those games. And you know what? They could have beat Atlanta, and they were beating Green Bay in the fourth quarter. So I'm not a complete idiot yet, or maybe whatever. But, oh boy, the Eagles, the Bills, the Lions, and the Vikings. I don't see how they beat the Eagles or the Bills. The Lions are surging. Detroit's probably playing their best ball right now, and they have a very outside chance of actually making the playoffs. So that leaves the Vikings, which I said could be a win if they already had the division locked up and they can't slide up or down in the playoff seeding. But also, Minnesota is kind of descending right now. I think they played something like 10 one-score games and have won 9 of them. I don't know how sustainable that is, but maybe I'm just trying to talk myself into it as well. So, yeah, I'll say the Bears have one more win in there somewhere. I don't know where. I'm not going to predict it, because if I do, I'm going to be wrong. So I'm just going to say there's maybe one left in there. You have to have a little bit of hope. Come on, let's try to be a little chipper here. With that being said, that does it for B55. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this.
Sundays at the Bar Room. We start off with Mike North and Aldo Gandia on the Early Bears Special. And then it's 5 Bears Fanatics on the Barfly Tailgate Show. That's followed by fantasy football advice from 2 fantasy football experts. And at halftime and after every Bears game, it's Bear Football. Subscribe to the Bar Room Network now.
Welcome back to Buffone 55. It's time for Buffone's Basement. I'm just laughing at some of the chat room right now. Abandon all ye hope who enter Buffone 55. That one got me. But this is a segment we call Buffone's Basement. That's where Alyssa and I, we kind of, we get a little loose. We find out who's gonna make us look good. So you know what? Let's go dust off Aldo Gandia, see if he wants to be on the show. Aldo, how you doing, man? Good, long time no see. I gotta bust your chops a little bit.
Please do. I missed working with you over the last 2-3 weeks, and Alyssa and I did a show together. We had a lot of fun. At the end of that show, off camera, I told her, you know what, I'm going to probably change that open because it does look bad.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to own it. I'm going to own that. If they're not going to be the worst team, but I think I also saying that, they're not going to be a 2 or 3 win team, and
yes.
That's looking more and more in doubt. So you know what? It is what it is. I will own that.
Maybe next year, when we kick off next season, you should say they're not going to win the Super Bowl. So then,
yeah, the little reverse curse. And yes, St. Omnia was up in a deer stand. Unfortunately, the deer didn't get the memo, so I was just kind of in a tree freezing, and for 6-7 hours didn't see a damn thing. But that's neither here nor there. But we can talk about the Bears because that's what we're here to do. How did you guys spend the bye week? Aldo, what'd you do in the bye week?
I relaxed. I, did the couch potato thing, watched a bunch of football games, NFL Red Zone. I tweeted out that thing is like crack, man. I mean, they're just going from game to game to game, and it's hard to, get up and go to the washroom. I might miss something. So I really enjoyed that. Did some things around the house, and of course, spending time with family and doing that while football games are on is a rarity in my home. So it was nice to do that.
And Alyssa, you said you kind of just chilled and were able to watch some football without any kind of anger involved with it, correct?
Yes. And Aldo's right. Red Zone is amazing. I love when the Bears, here's the thing. I know we hate primetime games, right? But
yes.
The one thing is that I get to watch Red Zone in the afternoon. You know what I mean? Or if they have a late game, like at 4:00, which has not happened at all this year, it's really nice. And, just kind of not having to work because I got all my stuff done. So I didn't have to be up till like midnight or anything doing work, just relaxing, watching football, not stressing, getting a little bowling in on a Sunday, which I kind of do during the off season. So, it was nice.
And you didn't have to write any stories, like write a post game or anything like that, which has got to be nice. Yeah.
Loved it.
What do you guys think about having a bye late in the season? Do you think that was good for the team, bad for the team? I read somewhere that perhaps, these injuries would not have piled up the way they did if they would have had a bye, week 8, 9, or 10.
I think it would be great if they were a playoff team because you get to rest a couple weeks right before you make that last surge, and you get a rest that a lot of teams don't get. For the Bears, for the most part, I think it's inconsequential. I think if you're going to get hurt, you're probably going to get hurt. But I probably would have liked to have seen this happen, 4 or 5 weeks ago. Maybe get a breather in there. Maybe break up the losing streak a little bit. Have that week to regroup. But for a team like this, I'm just going from off the top of my head. I think it's kind of inconsequential for the most part. I think it is what it is. It would have helped if you're a contending team, but they're not a contending team, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I think this year, I think it worked out well because of the injuries, right? Fields got an extra week to rest, although he got sick somehow. Yeah. And then Brisker and Gordon are now out of concussion protocol. So, I think that certainly helped, but it's way too late for the bye week. It's just late. They were eliminated from playoff contention before the bye week. That's how late it is.
Yeah, week 14 just seems like an incredibly late. I was looking at because that was the last week of a lot of fantasy leagues. It was our last regular season game for a lot of fantasy leagues, and it's just like, well, if you got to make your playoff, you're trying to make a playoff run. Your best players are I had Jonathan Taylor, and he was on a bye. Not that my game meant anything; it made the difference between 11th and 12th place. But had I been really needing to win that game, then it's like, oh no, my best player is on a bye in week 14. What? Okay, so it is strange. You get used to that, I guess. But we talked about this a little bit, but. We have, because I've been off for 3 weeks. I haven't been able to bring it up as much. Aldo, I'm going to start with you because this is something we always talk about. And I know that you were I was surprised by this, and I want to know if you're sticking to it. The embracing the tank or embracing the loss. I remember a few weeks ago you said you don't care if they win another game, and just because of the draft positioning and what it means for this team, and there's more important things. Are you staying with that?
I know that my answer is going to infuriate Chubbs in the chat room, but at this point, clearly, there is value in winning games. You want to establish a winning culture. You want players to feel good after games and so forth. But let's face it, the reality, the situation is that the roster is far, far underwhelming, much more underwhelming than many of the teams that they're facing. In fact, every team that they face the rest of the way has a much better roster. So to expect victory is, I think, a fool's errand. What I want to see is great individual performances. And if they can get a high draft pick, because I've started to do mock drafts too, and I walk away super excited when I can trade that number 2 or number 3 overall pick and load up on draft picks the rest of the drafts. A lot of people in the chat room are talking about Carter and talking about Anderson. Those guys are 2 of the best defensive linemen coming out in this draft, but each of them do have questions now. Todd McShay shocked the football world earlier this week when he said there were character issues with Carter, the defensive tackle from Georgia. So that has to be checked out. So you can't afford to lose a top 5 pick because of some players' inability to, stay focused on the game and play 100% and so forth. So trading away that a top pick for multiple picks and increasing your chances of getting hits is the way I want to go. And of course, if we lose these last 4 games, I'm not going to cry about it. I'll bitch and I'll moan because I'll be here rooting for them to win, but I'm not going to be the guy that I've been all of my life where I would be miserable all week, where my wife would say, let me know when I can start talking to you again. I'm not going to do that this year. Next year, yes.
Sure. Alyssa, are you embracing the tank?
Yeah, that's funny. Aldo said that because that was me during the Packers game. Like, obviously, because we had our show before when you weren't on, and we were talking about, do you want the Bears to beat the Packers or do you want them to lose so they get closer to a higher draft pick? And I mean, I was leaning towards the draft pick, but when the game started, I'm like, no, you got to beat these, you got to beat them, and I got really into it. So, and then obviously when they lost, I was mad for like 30 seconds, and then I was like, okay. We still had the number 2 overall pick, so it's kind of like at this point you have to embrace the tank, right? Because they're not really going anywhere. And like Aldo said, it's about individual performances. The most important being Justin Fields, who he lit it up in that game, right? And they still lost. And that's been the case in a lot of these games since the mini bye week, where Fields has had his best or historic performances and they still find a way to lose, which is ultimately going to help them in the long run, right? Because they're not competing for anything right now, but that gets you closer to that top draft pick where whether it's 2 or 3, there are some quarterback needy teams up there that you could trade back, or you could go after Anderson or Carter or whoever you want. So, I mean, at this point, especially with 4 games left, and you look at the teams left on this schedule, John, I am impressed that you found 1 win. I'm just like, there's none. I'm like, they're going to end this season on a 10-game losing streak.
Gotta find 1.
Maybe the Vikings, if they have the playoffs locked up and they can't go up or down, but I still feel like the Bears would win or lose that one. I mean,
they're going to get 1. They're going to get 1.
That would be 1. I don't know. Just like the opening, don't jinx yourself.
Right. You're probably right. I'm speaking it out of existence because that's what I do. I'm kind of in the hybrid of this because I am not taking the losses as hard as I normally do because I understand the roster and I understand what this season is about. However, I took the Packers game really hard because I was back home with a bunch of buffoons watching this game. We hate the Packers, and watching that. That would have been fine if they would have lost every other game and then beat the Packers. I would have been just fine with that. But the way they lost and Aaron Rodgers saying Chicago's like a second home to him, I hate that. I can't stand that. If they would have gone 2-15 this year and they just beat the Packers twice, I would have considered that almost a successful season, to be honest with you, because those games mean way more to me as a fan than the other ones at that point. So I wanted to win that game. I didn't take solace with the draft positioning. I didn't take solace in anything. I was pissed off. I had to drive 4 hours back to my house. I was pissed off the entire time. But in the long run, I'm trying to be more like, don't let this bother you for 2 days because they're losing to, the Falcons. Don't get upset because, they're going to get blown out by potentially the Eagles, who are way better than them right now. So I understand the idea and the high draft pick, and the mock drafts are exciting. And, the whole character issue thing, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that sometimes, because we've heard about guys with there wasn't a report that Justin Fields had character issues at one point, and that came out and it was false. And so I hate, the whole character. They said, George Pickens had character issues, and now, and they're still talking about his character issues in Pittsburgh because he says he's not getting the ball enough. Well, because he's probably not getting the ball enough if you look at that offense as well. But I unless the guy is has a rap sheet of legal things that have just been stockpiling up, where he's breaking the law and getting arrested and just, being let go because he's a star football player, then some of the character issues, I think they get over magnified, which everything gets over magnified in the draft process. You can talk about characters. You can talk about, oh, he ran a 4.45. I thought he ran a 4.42. We're talking about these minuscule things that people put under a magnifying glass, because these GMs, especially the ones at the top of the draft, they basically have one more chance before they get fired. And if they don't hit on some of these picks, they're going to be gone. So they're completely they're micro managing all this stuff, and they're trying to say oh, this guy didn't go to nobody showed up to this guy's birthday party. I mean, it's just this, all these little, psychoanalyzing things, which may have a little bit of merit to it, but at the same time, you gotta look, can the guy play? Is the guy going to play? And you have your chance to interview him at the combine or at the pro day or anything of that matter. So I think that whatever, that'll play itself out. I'm not a GM. I'm not the one that's going to be interviewing these guys. Hopefully they make the right decision there. As we move into the offseason, though, one thing that I thought was a very interesting question, and I want to present it to you guys, and I want to hear your responses, because I ask my best questions when I don't have an answer, because I don't have an answer. But if you look at the NFC North, who would you most want to be heading into 2023? Because you look at some of these teams, and the Packers will most likely still have Aaron Rodgers, but there's still a lot of questions around that team and around the weapons around him, and the defense not playing as well as they thought it was going to play. Minnesota, who's going to win the division this year, and they have Justin Jefferson, who might be the best receiver in the league, but you have Kirk Cousins, you have some there's some shortcomings in other places. Would you rather be Detroit, who is playing pretty good ball right now, and they're going to have a high draft pick because they have the Rams first rounder, who would have thought the Rams first rounder was going to turn into something pretty big in the draft out of the Matt Stafford trade, but they're going to have a pretty good situation going into next year. And then you have the Bears, who have the most cap space out of anyone. They're going to have a high draft pick. They're going to have plenty of draft capital after, the Quinn trade, and they're going to have a high first rounder and a relatively, well, they're not going to have their own second rounder, but they're going to have a second rounder out of the Roquan deal. So who would you most want to be heading into 2023 if you're in the NFC North? Aldo, I can see the gears moving in your head. Who you got?
Well, I hate to say this because Don Burr is in the chat room, right?
Mine too. That was my answer.
So we can say it together, Alyssa.
Yes.
But it is Detroit. I have been complimenting their roster since after the draft. They had a really fantastic draft last year, and the year before that, they did it the old-fashioned way. They built their offensive line. They added the skill players to the point that they've made Jared Goff look like a reasonable quarterback to keep, and maybe not have to spend one of their first-round draft picks on a quarterback, and perhaps put all of their money into Goff and add more pieces to his arsenal in this upcoming draft. So the Lions are in a good position. The one thing that I don't like about the Detroit Lions is their coaching staff. And I know a lot of fans, and especially a lot of people in Detroit, love Dan Campbell. He wears his feelings on his sleeve and so forth. But like overly emotional coaches, to me, are spending too much time crying and lifting weights and running with the team, as opposed to thinking about how to make their team better. I don't particularly like that. And I know on Hard Knocks they edit things to tell a particular story, but I saw their offensive and defensive coaches going at each other in a way that was, to me, more juvenile than it was adult-like. The focus should be on the players, not on whether your guy beat your guy. I don't buy into that. And now I never grew up being a hardcore ball player. I played sports, but I was never on a team. And so maybe that world is something that I just never encountered and fell in love with. But I come from the old style of a thinking coach and coaches who put their players first. And I don't know if this Lions staff does that, but other than that, they are stacked with talent and will be adding more.
Yeah, it's funny because I just did another podcast today, and I got a question about, it was kind of like the Packers trending down. So which team would you be most concerned about heading into 2023 in terms of the Bears competing with them and all that? And it was the Vikings and the Lions are the top two. And I picked the Lions, which will appease my family if they're out here watching that. But I've just been really impressed with what you said. Like Aldo said, the draft, it started there, but this is a team that, I've seen a lot of Lions games, obviously my family being from there. And it's just been impressive to watch them kind of build it from the ground up, starting in the trenches with the offensive line. That is a great offensive line. And to see what they've done on offense, I think Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, is not getting enough credit for what he's been able to do. And like Aldo said, making Jared Goff look like a great quarterback. He has been very impressive, that entire offense. They can run the ball, they can pass the ball. And then on defense too, they started off as one of the worst defenses in the league, but it's a very young, strong core, I think, that they have is on defense, especially. And my guy, Aiden Hutchinson, is killing it. And I've been very impressed with what I've seen from them. And it doesn't feel like the same old Lions, because I've seen a lot of them, and this feels a little different. We'll see ultimately what ends up happening, but I think that because they had that young roster in place, and the coaching staff, I get what you're saying, Aldo, but I do think, if Ben Johnson's able to stick around on offense, I think that, that's going to be huge for them, because he's someone that people are talking about as a potential head coaching candidate, kind of like Luke Getsy was getting some talk, right, with what he's done with Fields. So but then you have the Vikings too, right? And they kind of feel like they're Super Bowl ready, right? So, it's been very impressive to see what they've been able to do. So, we'll see what the Bears do, because that's the thing. Of course you want to pick the Bears. I want to, because they have Justin Fields and they have a lot of salary cap space, and they're going to have a top 2, top 3 draft pick. But, we haven't seen what Ryan Poles is going to do this offseason, right? And I think that's the one thing kind of holding me back. Maybe we ask this question before the start of the season, right? When all the moves have happened. And I don't know, I hope I have a different answer at that point.
Yeah, me too.
and that's why I think it's a really interesting time to ask this question, because of the unknown. First and foremost, I love Dan Campbell. Now, I will say, I don't know if I want him to be the head coach of my team, but I love Dan Campbell, because I think that's how I would be a head coach. I'd be yelling the entire time. I'd be doing push-ups. I'd be, drinking his 55 coffees that he has per day. That's I would be Dan Campbell. That. I just feel like that's how I would be doing things. But is that the best way to do it? I don't know. But looking over this situation, I'm actually, and I'm not trying to be a homer in this situation, but I am leaning Bears, but with the caveat that there's a lot of unknowns that have to take care of itself first. Now, the biggest thing with the Lions is I think they have a great infrastructure there. I think they have the rosters built nicely. I don't know if you can win a Super Bowl. I know Jared Goff's been to a Super Bowl with Sean McVay, but I don't know if he and Dan Campbell and that staff can get to a Super Bowl. So do they use that high pick on a quarterback? And then do you start this whole thing of, did you hit on the quarterback? Because what's the percentage of a hit on a first round quarterback? 50%, maybe a little higher. But I think that if they go that way, because I think Jared Goff has a pretty significant cap hit for the next 2 years, so he's going to be on the roster. So are they going to draft a quarterback with that high pick and then bring him along under Goff? So I'm leaning Bears because I think they have something really special at the quarterback position, which I don't think the Vikings have right now, and I don't think the Lions have right now. The Packers do, but for how long? And how long is that actually going to really work in Green Bay? So I think out of the trajectory of the quarterbacks in that division, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm most encouraged about the Chicago Bears quarterback situation, given what's in the rest of the division. And then you give the fact that they're also going to have a high draft pick that they don't have to use on a quarterback. They can use to bolster some of the big needs. Not to mention they're not being drugged down by any big contracts on that roster. So this comes down to, and we've been saying this throughout the entire season, it comes down to what Ryan Poles is going to do. There's no more excuses. There's nothing that we can blame other than the construction of the roster by the GM now. He traded away Khalil Mack. He traded away Roquan Smith. This is his team now, and he's going to be able to build it from the ground up with a ton of cash, and he gets to choose what he's going to address in the draft. He's going to choose what he's going to address in free agency. So now, if we're talking about this next year and they're in a similar situation, we're not blaming the quarterback. We're not blaming Matt Nagy. We're not blaming, we're not blaming Ryan Pace for all of his missteps with the salary cap. We're going to blame Ryan Poles for it. And so this is a huge pressurized season. Now, I'm not saying they have to be Super Bowl contenders next year, but they better damn sure be better than what they are this year. They better be maybe competing for a playoff spot next year. I'm not saying they have to be a 12-win team and win the Super Bowl, but they better be in a playoff contention system. I don't want to be like, in the hunt and they're 5 games back. I want them to be, really shooting for a playoff contention, because eventually. And I actually, Aldo, I think you might have talked about this with Dan Weeder, where it's like, when do we raise the bar for the team? And I think I think next year really is. I think next year is where most fans are saying, we're giving you a pass for 2023 because we saw what you were taking away, what you were skinning down. You're taking this down to the absolute studs. You got this offseason to build it back up. And and next year, it better be better. It better be better than it is now. And it better be way better, because right now, if you're a 3-win team, you better at least triple that next year. Like if they what's a realistic? If they win 3 games this year, what's a realistic jump next year? I say 9 wins. If you have this formula that you're really convinced that it's gonna work, then you better have 9 wins next year.
Yeah, they got to figure out a way to get to 500 or above 500, given the uneven schedule. Dan Weeder said, I want to caution everyone who's thinking that we're a playoff team next year, that might not happen. And he has reason to be cautious about that, because there are so many holes on this team. And you'd have to hit on every selection, every free agent signing, every draft pick. There'd have to be players who are on the roster, particularly the young players like a Kyler Gordon, who have to improve and get to that next step. A lot of things have to happen, as opposed to a team like Detroit, where they will, at the way they're playing now, incremental improvement next season will probably get them into the playoffs. So the Bears have a bigger cavern to get out of. But as you and Alyssa have said, we have the quarterback now, and that is huge. And so one of the things that I'd like to see over the next few games is how Fields is now going to help the wide receivers become better, because great quarterbacks do help the players around them to be better.
Yeah, and honestly, though, are your expectations, at least be in the playoff conversation next year? Because that's where mine are.
Can I see the schedule first?
Well,
the station
we're like 3 months, but they're gonna have a last place schedule.
As a fan, yes. As as an observer, I think that the other teams in the division are still going to be well ahead of the Bears and in better position to make a playoff spot than Chicago, based on what we have now and the assets that we have now compared to them. Again, the Lions have assets like if they were an 0-17 team with the draft capital that they have. So I'm a little worried about Detroit for the first time since I was actually in Detroit. Just kidding, Detroit people.
Well, I'll be honest. Listen, this is the NFL where, remember this year we thought that the AFC West was going to have 4 playoff teams in it. The Raiders are going to be so good with Carr. Russell Wilson's going to bring the Broncos to prominence. And, the Chargers are Super Bowl contenders, which they're good. They're not as good as we thought they were going to be. And then you have the Chiefs. Well, none of that happened. And then the Rams, we thought they're going to repeat. That didn't happen. Not making playoffs. So I don't think it's insane to say that the Bears could take a step forward and other teams could take a step back, and that they could jump into that 7-6 seed, whereas a team that does not play as well can jump into something else. But I guess we'll wrap up this basement segment with, what do you want to see against Philadelphia? What would be a success? What is success to you guys?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
I mean, I want to see what Justin Fields can do against a really good, what I think is the best defense in the NFL right now. So, I mean, again, at this point, that you're not really going to win this game. I'm just wondering how bad it's going to be. But it's about the individual performances, which we touched on earlier. And to see some of Fields' better performances this year have come against some pretty good defenses. So I'm really curious to see how he does, but also too to see him and Jalen Hurts both kind of, what I would love, I don't foresee it happening because I think this defense is that good, but I would love to see, even if it's early on, maybe them get into a shootout, kind of see him go back and forth, because Jalen Hurts is a quarterback that a lot of people were touting just last year, and now he's in the MVP conversation, and that's where you hope Justin Fields goes. And I think Jalen Hurts is a great comp for him. So I'm really curious to see how Fields does against this defense. And can he keep up with Hurts? Let's see.
I'll just add quickly, I want to see turnovers, and I want to see a lot of points scored. I will, again, the Eagles are a great team, and I hope that when you have Sean on, our guest, is you talk a little bit about how that team was built, because I think that should be the blueprint for the Chicago Bears, and the way that the Eagles have provided arsenal for my guy Hurts.
You love Jalen Hurts.
I love him coming out of college. I was very disappointed that they didn't invest a second rounder. But if the Bears follow that Eagles game plan, then maybe next year we could be battling for a playoff spot.
It can happen. And like you said, when we come back, we are going to talk to Sean Green, the host of the Die Hard Eagles podcast and the Sports Gambling podcast. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to break down this Bears-Eagles game, because there is a game on Sunday. We'll be back with more Buffone 55 right after this. Welcome back to Buffone 55, and like we teased before that, 10-second break, our guest tonight is Sean Green, the host of the Die Hard Eagles podcast and the Sports Gambling podcast. Sean, appreciate you being on Buffone 55. How you doing, bud?
Doing great. The Eagles are 12-1, right? I can't complain. So yeah, really excited, and we got a fun home stretch for the Birds. So yeah, pretty jacked.
Well, you can't complain, but that's all we do on this podcast. So you're going to have to entertain us a little bit. But I do want to start with overall and look at this holistically, because the Eagles are flying high, only one loss on the season, and they seem destined to make at least a run at the Super Bowl. At this point, in your opinion, what stands between the Eagles and making it back to the Super Bowl for the first time since, I believe, 2017? What's the biggest obstacle that could be in their way?
Yeah, I think it's going to just come down to, how does Jalen Hurts look in playoff games? He's had an amazing season. I think he's the MVP right now. We do have 4 games left, but it's still an unknown, right? There are some quarterbacks in the NFC with more playoff experience than him. So I think, one, if they can get the number 1 seed and get home field advantage, that is huge. That makes their path that much easier to get to the Super Bowl. But again, he's he has no playoff experience. So that to me is the biggest unknown right now for the team.
And speaking of Hurts, there are a lot of people that had written him off last season, and he certainly appears to be proving everybody wrong with an MVP caliber season. And I'm curious, what's impressed you most about Hurts this season, and what's been the biggest factor in his improved play?
Yeah, I mean, I was super high on him from the beginning. Like once I saw him come in and saw the work ethic he had and his commitment and dedication, I was like, this guy's the man. And I thought I saw enough flashes of him throwing the ball in year one to be optimistic about year two. I mean, I didn't have them going 12-1. I thought I was being a homer calling for 12-5. Now that looks like a nightmare scenario. So I didn't even think it would be this much of a jump. I mean, one, they continue to build with the offensive and defensive line. Obviously, having a great offensive line makes your job so much easier. And two, Alshon Jeffrey, it kind of reminded me of when they signed Alshon Jeffrey. Didn't mean to rub salt in the wounds for Bears fans, but when Alshon Jeffrey came in 2017, he really helped Carson Wentz make that jump. And in the same way, you're seeing this with AJ Brown to make a jump, right? Because he has a massive catch radius. Even some of these, like a couple of the balls that Hurts throws that aren't good, he picks them up. He has a great, run after the catch. So he's making his job look way, way easier. I mean, he's put in the work, but they've built a great team around him as well.
And let's talk about that run game a little bit, because Miles Sanders has become the first Eagles rusher to hit, I believe, eclipse 1,000 yards since Shady McCoy back in 2014. And this was kind of his prove-it year where there was a lot of doubt around the run game. They weren't sure if he was going to be the guy. The trade rumors about like Kareem Hunt and all this other stuff. So what's been the biggest key to Miles Sanders' success? And is this a guy that's going to be in an Eagles uniform next year?
That is a really tough question as far as will they re-sign him? I mean, I think they'll want him back, but Howie Roseman, he's a fan of analytics, and it's really tough to give a running back that second contract to justify because he bet on himself, Miles Sanders, right? And he's having that career year in the contract year. We always talk about it in sports. He came in, you saw it in training camp, like he had an extra spring to his step. Like last year, he had a pretty good year. He didn't score a rushing touchdown, which was kind of like a statistical anomaly. Now he's already got 10 this season. So he was due to get those touchdowns that he wasn't getting last year, but he also is just running harder. Like there's no hesitancy in his game, which had kind of been an issue. And the offensive line continues to dominate. I think the argument against Miles Sanders is that, Kenny Gainwell's had moments where he's looked good. They've even put in Boston Scott, and he's able to run behind that offensive line. The Eagles have a ton of draft capital, so I think they like Miles, but would I be shocked if they just drafted a guy in the second or third round and said, hey, sorry, man, it's been fun, and save some money because they got to pay Jalen Hurts. So unfortunately, he may be odd man out as much as I've loved his year this year.
And you talked a little bit about AJ Brown, and I'm curious what's impressed you most about him, and also what makes him so dangerous to contend with. And can you talk also a little bit about Devontae Smith and how he complements Brown?
Yeah, no, it's awesome because I don't know. There was like this inside joke where they called one of the receivers Batman or something, and then there was a thing where it's like, oh, actually, we have three Batmans. We have Swole Batman, which is AJ Brown. They have Skinny Batman, which is Devonta Smith, and then Fast Batman, which is Quez Watkins, and then Fat Batman is Jason Kelsey. But they really seem to have a good match, right? Because AJ Brown is big, physical, and then Devonta Smith. I mean, if you get fired up watching guys run crisp routes, fire up some Devonta Smith highlights, and you could just see, especially going up against a second quarterback, like they just don't have the athletic ability to stick with him, and very good hands. But really, his route running is just insane. And getting back to AJ Brown, it sounds preposterous, but like he looks similar to the year T.O. had. Like the year he had, and it's a mix, right? He's good yard after catch. He's super physical, bringing the ball down, and he's not slow by any means. He's just a super tough guard. And then if you have Devonta Smith on the other side in a legit running game, your hands are going to be full.
And they could be getting another weapon back because they've designated Dallas Goedert to return off injured reserve this week. How does his return impact this offense moving forward? And what do you think Bears fans can expect to see on Sunday if he does return to the field?
Yeah, I would project that he does play. I don't know if they're going to give him a full workload, but I do think he plays. In a weird way, their offense has been really good without Dallas Goedert these past 3 games. Points-wise, they're hitting some of their highest numbers. I don't really understand it. I think what it did was force them to get Quez Watkins more involved. They didn't really get much from the backup tight ends, but I think it was good. Gave Quez some confidence, got him worked in. So I would say I do think Dallas Goedert will play. I don't know if he'll get the full workload. So I think they'll get him a couple catches, get him slowly working back in the offense.
One area the Bears have struggled in is getting after the quarterback this season. And I was wondering how the Eagles' offensive line has fared in protecting Jalen Hurts. And is there any weakness along that line that Chicago could exploit?
Oh, man. It's going to be tough because the offensive line has been really good. They build around the offensive line, right? Like they go out of their way. Howie Roseman, as much as guys like me have called for them to fire him at times, when you draft Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. But on the flip side, he found a guy, Jordan Mailata, who never played football before and got him in the 7th round. And now he's a franchise left tackle. So he has some real highs and lows with his draft picks. They're pretty strong. I mean, as far as offensive line weaknesses, there's been times where Jason Kelce has had issues with the snap, which is pretty rare for a guy, a veteran center like himself. And then there's been times where Jordan Mailata, if you can get to the outside quick on him, he's a big dude. He has a big frame. He doesn't necessarily have the bend that maybe some left tackles that are better than him have. So I think if you get an outside speed rush on Jordan Mailata, that's your best bet. But other than that, Hurts is tough to get to because he sees the field pretty well and he's elusive. So you saw the Packers try and get that outside rush going, and then he just ran for 157 yards. So you kind of have to pick your poison with the Eagles.
Let's switch to the other side of the ball because the Bears finally started to air things out against the Packers before the bye week. Can Justin Fields find success through the air against this talented Eagles secondary? Give us a breakdown on them and what some of the strengths are.
Well, so our outside corners are really pretty good and kind of remind me of the receivers. Like their skill sets complement each other, I think, with Darius Slay and Bradbury. I think the weakness right now for the Eagles defense is at the safety position. We're down to our third safety, Kavon Wallace, a guy like they didn't want to put out in the field. They had an undrafted guy, Reed Blankenship, playing in over him when we lost our original safety, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who was injured. They put in Reed Blankenship. He just got injured. So I think middle of the field, that kind of stuff. I know you guys got Cole Kmet back. I would say if you're going to attack like passing game wise, I think over the middle, stuff like that with Cole Kmet will be your best option. Trying to get Cole Kmet on Kavon Wallace. Marcus Epps, the other safety, has been kind of a weak spot, but on the outsides, we do a really good job. And we just got our nickel cornerback, Avonte Maddox, back, who played really well last week. So I think middle of the field, deep against the safeties, make the safeties work in pass coverage. And hopefully the Bears offensive coordinator's not listening right now. Cause I'm sure he's going to see it on tape, but if I was going after the Eagles, that's what I would do.
Loyal listener. Yeah.
Getsy, I hope you're taking notes. Yeah. And also you heard it here first. If you have Cole Kmet in your fantasy league, start him Sunday.
It could, again, of the Bears guys on offense, obviously I'm worried about Justin Fields being able to break one. I'm debating whether or not to start him in fantasy because he's won me a bunch in fantasy, but I can't start players who are going against the Eagles. Yeah. So I'm really torn here. And then it is the playoffs. So I'm really going to have a heart to heart with myself come Saturday night. Obviously he can do a ton on the ground, but I was high on Justin Fields coming into the season. I think he's made some explosive plays in the pass game. I saw enough flashes that first year that made me optimistic about him this year. Now, of course, they got off to a rough start. They didn't. I don't know what kind of offense they were running early on, but something switched, and they're like, "Hey, this guy's great running the ball. Let's let him run." until he fully develops the passing game. And similar path that Jalen Hurts went on. Like last year, he was not a guy that was scaring you in the passing game, but you saw some flashes and you slowly worked him along with the offense. You gave him some weapons. So if I'm a Bears fan, I'm talking myself into like a similar path that Jalen Hurts went on. So I am worried about Justin Fields. I mean, he's a very explosive guy. And then Cole Kmet. And the Eagles have had issues in the run game on the road in particular. They did get Jordan Davis back, and they signed Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph, just a bunch of fat guys to throw on the defensive line to clog things up there. But in games where, like their one loss against the Commanders, it was just a lot of like 3 yards, the 3 yards in a cloud of dust, because the Eagles defense will kind of sit back and let you make a mistake and tie your own noose there. So if you guys can consistently do that, I think that's the way to attack them.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue to my next question. The Bears have the best run game in the NFL. The Eagles are behind them at number 2, and they're obviously going to look to lean on that with David Montgomery and Justin Fields. Can we expect Chicago's success on the ground to continue? And how have the Eagles fared against running quarterbacks like Fields this season, if they've faced any?
Yeah, I'm trying to, because Fields is in a level of his own, honestly, with Justin Hurts in my mind. We did an okay job with Kyler Murray, held them to 17 points. He didn't really kill us. I think what you're going to see is a lot of the 5-man front, especially with Jordan Davis back, where, that's a pretty formidable defensive line, and you got to get a pretty good push. So I think they're going to put 5 guys on the line. I think they're going to come in focused to stop the run. And I think they're going to come into the game plan. Well, as an Eagles fan, a lot of times we saw last year where teams would just load the box against the run and say, hey, beat us with your passing game. And unfortunately, last year, Hurts had trouble doing that. And I think the Eagles are going to come in with a similar strategy.
I got to ask you about the pass rush specifically because the Bears traded Robert Quinn to Philadelphia. What so far has been his impact, if any, with Philadelphia, and what does the pass rush look like as a whole?
Well, I think his impact is giving you guys a free 4th-round pick because he hasn't done anything. And fortunately, we haven't needed him because Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham is having like a career year, even at his age. I mean, he should be talked about for, comeback player of the year. He might have double-digit sacks. He's like a limited edge rusher, but he's playing really well. So the pass rush has done really well, even with getting absolutely nothing from Robert Quinn. So enjoy the draft pick, guys. He's on the IR right now, so he hasn't really done anything.
It's very rare to have wins this season for the Bears, so I'm going to take that one as a win, and I appreciate it. And Sean, we always get a kick out of talking about the opponent's special teams. Is there anyone Bears fans should be looking out for on Sunday, be it a kicker, a return guy, or a gunner?
Well, I would say keep a lookout for the Eagles special teams coach, Michael Clay, because he's kind of on the hot seat. The special teams have been a weakness of the team. Honestly, the only real Giants points were scored off a muffed punt that the Eagles had, or the punter messed it up, and the whole thing there. They've been bad in the return game. Honestly, the bright spot over special teams right now is Jake Elliott, our kicker. And our punt returner, Britton Covey, he's kind of been like a fun, guy you root for because he has no athletic talent, and it's fun if he gets like 10 yards, but there's no one that's going to be taking a kick to the house or anything like that. So I just watch for Jake Elliott nailing a sweet field goal. That's really your only concern.
We'll keep an eye out for that. That sounds like a good time. I do want to go to some chat room questions for you, Sean. I'm going to start with Laz. He said, would Sean like to talk about Kelsey? What's it like to have a great center?
I mean, he's an all-time Eagle, and they put out a Christmas album. He's super fun. He's an athletic guy that you can get involved, pulling and doing everything. So, again, thoughts and prayers for teams with not a good center, especially going up against Jordan Davis this week. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Let's go to another chat room question. Let's go with Nomad. Ask Sean if he thinks the Eagles will let Andre Dillard hit free agency.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they will. As awesome as it's been to have the luxury of Andre Dillard, in some ways kind of a bust because you draft him, 20th overall or whatever it was. You expect him to be the left tackle of the future. I mean, follow the money. They pay Jordan Mailata. They expect Jordan Mailata to be the guy. And I just don't think you're going to pay a left tackle any sort of money. And Andre Dillard, he's looked pretty good in relief. Like anytime Jordan Mailata or Lane Johnson have gotten hurt, he's filled in. So I think he's shown enough to get paid by a team like starter money. So I think they definitely let him walk.
Got another one about fantasy. Cliff Victoria wants to know, Sean, can the Eagles D step up for my fantasy playoffs? That's more going to be an indictment on the Bears offense than the Eagles defense. But go.
Well, yes, we can. We've been creating turnovers, so that's obviously huge. Turnovers and sacks, and even if like the spread right now is 9 points, if the Eagles get out to a lead and the Bears are playing against soft coverage, that's usually good for the offense to create some fantasy points. But it means that the Bears are going to be dropping back a ton of times in the pass game, which means 1, opportunities for sacks, 2, opportunities for interceptions. So I do think we're going to help you out this week for fantasy.
Before we get into some of those predictions, I believe we got one more question here from St. Omni. It says, question for Sean, Jim's or Geno's? I assume those are cheesesteaks we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm a Geno's guy, but again, I'm never going to turn down a cheesesteak. But yeah, Geno's all the way.
Can't really go wrong.
Good answer.
Yeah.
No, come on.
Let's get into the game itself, because I know that you're kind of a connoisseur of the sports gambling as well. So let's talk about you talk about that 9-point spread. Obviously, we can talk about who you're going to pick to win the game. You're going to pick the Eagles. We're all going to pick the Eagles. But how about that 9-point spread? How do you feel about that for Bears fans that may want to have a little bit more of a vested interest in the game, maybe not the scoreboard as much as the scoreboard, but not necessarily who wins the game? How do we think about, what do we feel about that 9-point spread?
Yeah, I would, again, we just recorded our episode of Sports Gambling Podcast. I did take the Eagles laying the 9. If you're talking yourself into the Bears getting 9 points, I think the case is pretty easy. The Eagles have a division game next Saturday, Christmas Eve, against the Dallas Cowboys. So they could very well be like looking ahead here to that huge game against Dallas, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears backdoor that 9 points. So I like the Eagles to win 34-20, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Bears get a backdoor score there or make it a little closer. And in a similar situation, when the Eagles went on the road against the Arizona Cardinals the week before they played the Cowboys last time, they won 20-17. They did not cover the spread. So I think if you're talking yourself into a Bears cover, that's what you're leaning on. As far as like Bears best bets, maybe even look to the team total, because I do think the Eagles will be able to put up points, and I think the Bears will be in some situations, maybe late in the second half or whatever, where the Eagles will be sitting back a little bit. Jonathan Gannon does that with his defense. So Bears team total, I think, could give you guys some hope. And the Bears offense has had moments, especially at home, where they put up a ton of points.
Is there anyone, and I'm speaking strictly from a Chicago Bears fan standpoint, where you could bet on an anytime touchdown that you think might be a good bet against this Eagles defense? Who would you go for that might have some long odds, but also could, cash out pretty good?
Yeah, I would go back to Cole Kmet. I think with our safety issues, I think he could be a real handful. I mean, like Montgomery or Justin Fields, those would be the odds-on favorite. But I think Kmet, you're probably getting a better price, and I like your chances there.
All right, and it looks like we have one more right under the door there. We got one more listener question. Ask Sean what he thinks what will happen to Javon Hargrave.
Yeah, I think they're in on Javon Hargrave. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have his deal in front of me, but I think they're down to continue to pay him because he's a young guy and on a decent deal. I think this might end up being the last year for a guy like Fletcher Cox, who they did this weird thing where they cut and then re-signed him. I would be surprised if Fletcher Cox is an Eagle next year, and I think that's going to free up some cap space for a guy like Javon Hargrave, who I think they're in on.
Excellent stuff. Well, Sean, before we cut you loose, can you tell our listeners and viewers where they can find your work, where they can listen to you? Because you're more than just an Eagles guy. So where can they catch your stuff?
Yeah, Sports Gambling Podcast. Just put it in Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. Pick every NFL game against the spread, and it's part of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. So we got shows for anything you want to bet on: college basketball, MMA, NBA. We got a hockey gambling podcast. So really kind of whatever sport you're into, we got some guys breaking it down and giving you some free picks, all free.
Excellent stuff. I love free.
Hey, it's free. It's for me.
That's right. Well, hey, we appreciate you being on Buffone 55 here. And like I tell all of our guests, we're going to talk to you down the line when the Eagles and Bears inevitably meet in the NFC Championship game. How's that sound?
Let's go. Best of luck with that.
All right, Sean, thank you so much for being on. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up Buffone 55. Don't go anywhere.
Ellis Hall, since I came here, has been expanded twice, and both times after we were gone, by the way. So we never got it. But I mean, it was tiny.
Do you think that Olin Kreutz would politely ask you to leave the weight room because it was so crowded?
I told you what Olin used to say to me.
I know, that's why I'm asking.
No, and that was at 5 o'clock when there's no players around.
Olin is
There you go. Get the out of my weight room. And I go,
I think I got a commercial here.
Welcome back to Buffone 55 as we wrap things up. Yay, let's get Aldo Gandia back in here. Aldo, I don't want you to pull a hamstring or anything, but go ahead and get back in here, you old.
There he is.
There. You doing all right, buddy? You hanging in there? You're muted right now.
Mid-show form.
Yeah. You're still muted. What the hell's going on, man?
It's only been a week. Okay, a couple weeks.
Content, man.
I was saying, as I was muted, I was saying, yeah, I'm missing all my cues. I'm really screwing up back here.
You know what? The season's winding down. We're in the last quarter of the season. Just you're in cruise control. The Bears are in cruise control. It is what it is. But I wanted to bring you back in for some closing thoughts, and you can tell everybody what the hell is going on with the Barroom Network as far as all the programming coming up, because there's so much. I tell you, even though the Bears are bad, there's so much content that to go on here, man. So I hope that everyone likes, subscribes, gets the alert on YouTube, all that other stuff, because there is literally a show for almost everything and anyone and every day. So, Aldo, what do we got?
Well, first of all, the interview that I did for the Dan Aldo Bear Souls with Dan Wiederer, I'm going to isolate that interview because it was about 50 minutes long, and we cut it up into pieces for last night's show. But I'm going to send it out on the Barroom Network's YouTube channel in its entirety, uninterrupted. It's, again, 45 minutes, and I think people will find that interesting. Chubb submitted a question that Dan Wiederer responded to, and it was, I think, a good interview covering the role of the sports journalist and the media landscape now, and then also tackling a number of pertinent Bears issues and questions that were in the last 20 minutes of the show. So that and what's coming up at 9 p.m. Central, Danny Shimon's Bear Truth. Danny is breaking down tape of Jack Sanborn and Braxton Jones. These were names that were submitted in the chat room. So he's got about 7 or 8 plays for each player, and talk about these 2 promising acquisitions that Ryan Poles added to this team. This is what Poles is going to need to do this offseason, right? Yeah. Not only hit with those high draft picks, but find the undrafted free agent like a Jack Sanborn. Find that 5th rounder who can step into the into a starting job. So those 2 shows, and then we've got Crosstown Crosstalk tomorrow, baseball talk. There's always, baseball is 11 months out of the year, right? So Vinny Parisi will be tackling that. And then on Sunday, tomorrow, we've got the Mac and Reed show at 6 p.m. and Science Fliction at 9 p.m. So we've got a lot of fresh programming the rest of this week before we start anew on Sunday.
Excellent. Alyssa, you probably got 25 articles coming out by tomorrow, I'm guessing.
You're not far off. Yeah. As always, there is a game that the Bears are playing this week. So we have plenty of Bears Eagles coverage coming up on Bears Wire. And during the bye week, we kind of started. I mean, let's be real. I think all of us were already starting in the 2023 offseason back in
like September.
October.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a while, but we have a lot of that coverage as well. And our first mock draft by my guy, Nate Atkins, is up on the site. And just kind of, at this point, 4 games left, trying to be optimistic. I know it's a new feeling here for Buffone 55 for us here, but trying to be optimistic looking ahead to 2023. And yeah, you start seeing a lot more of that as we ramp up during these final 4 games.
New year, new us, kind of.
I'd be very curious to see how, what this show would be like when the Bears are winning.
Listen, I'm telling you, this whole positivity thing is going to run its course at some point because I only have so much of this in me, and I'm letting it go for this entire season. But if we're in the same position next year, I'm not going to be all sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. There's going to be some hellfire and brimstone instead. So I'm just biding my time. I'm trying.
Rated R,
cool.
folks.
I'm just letting it play out, and then there better be some return on investment here. So they're like all this emotional stuff that I'm just letting go, and I usually harness. I'm just I'm being zen. There needs to be something. There needs to be a little bit of improvement next year. But just wanted to shout out the chat room. Thanks for everyone that was in there who came back, and it's so cool to see this whole community we got here that just talking Bears, talking anything. And Laz, appreciate you reaching out. It was great to see you in Chicago as well. It just blows my mind that people are still listening to this show 6 years after the fact. And like I said, I'm wrong about everything. Why are you still listening? But at the same time, we have a lot of fun here. And also, don't forget to catch Bear football right after the game. As soon as the game hits 000, I'll be back on that show this Sunday. Myself, and Danny Shimon and Tyler Ellis will be there. As soon as the clock hits 000, we're going to give you some raw emotion after that Bears game. Although we're going to try to keep it practical, but we're going to have, but you know what? It still stings. The second that you hit 000, it still stings when they lose. But maybe they win. They could win. We're talking about a big upset. That would be awesome. Well,
is that the one win?
That's the one win they're going to get. They're going to punch the Eagles in the mouth this week. That's the one win that we're going to get for the rest of the season. I'll take that. That would be awesome. Because then everyone would be talking about what's wrong with the Eagles and because they lost to the Bears. We could potentially be that Grinch because then we got to go and Merry Christmas. You got to play the Bills on Christmas Eve because that's super neat. That's how I wanted to spend my holiday. But neither here nor there. But anyway, that will wrap up this edition of Buffone 55. We appreciate everyone tuning in, whether it's the live version, the podcast version, the video version, the audio version, whether it's your first time or your 55th time. I appreciate each and every one of you. That'll do it for this week. For Aldo Gandia and Alyssa Barbieri, I'm John Buffone. We'll see you next time.
Adios.